Any good experiment starts off with a plan. So this was the first step in the procedure of the experiments. Here I have set out a broad plan for the experimental procedure with the type of materials that need to be worked and how they will be worked. The next step was to procure all the materials needed for the experiments and then to start the actual creating of the tools. So this included the knapping of the stone tool scrapers, as well as creating and shaping the handles for hafting, and in preparing some leather strips to be able to secure those tools into the wooden handle. The process will be covered in this video, part 1, and then there will be a part 2 which discusses shows the actual use of the scrapers on the different materials, and then part 3 will likely cover all of the results from the studies and the use where. The creation of the scrapers itself, so pieces of material were knapped to get flakes that can be turned into scrapers. A variety of techniques were used, including freehand hard hammer, so a piece of stone used as a hammer, and soft hammers like a piece of wooden billet or bone. As well as the bipolar technique, which means a little pebble or rock is placed between an anvil and then smashed with a rock. So smashed between two hard pieces. Now in the later Stone Age this can be done with quite some precision and accuracy depending on what type of flakes and shapes you want. Flakes that were good for creating the scrapers were isolated and then further shaped, either using a stone hammer or a piece of bone as a billet. The edges were then carefully refined using pressure flaking with a bone point. This is to ensure that there's a good even surface and that the edge doesn't have serrated edges that can tear into the hide or create streaks in any particular material that you're working. Scrapers needed to be hafted onto a wooden handle, so some pieces of wood were shaped into handles and cut down for this purpose. Modern tools were used for this process to save time, as the focus of the experiment was on the working edges of the actual stone scraper and not the handles or the hafting area. And doing it the traditional way would have taken months, because you'd have to use stone implements to scrape every piece and shape every piece. Now the handles were basically to create, for some of the tools, a very stable handle to use the tool, as some of them were lightly hafted. But we're also having some pieces of stone scrapers that we're going to use only with the hand to get an idea of what different techniques they may have used and to see if it has an impact on the use wear. To note though, use wear might have been impacted by the actual making and shaping of the scrapers themselves, as you often use pieces of stone or bone to shape the edge that you'll be using for working. That may leave some traces on the tool, so a couple have been used as control where we'll look at them under the microscope and they won't be used for any task. They'll just be finished, completely napped but not worked. So then we can see if they actually do show some use wear, and for comparisons with actual tools we can see under the microscope if there is some impact or not. 4 tools were used for each task, and each of these tasks included working a different material to see if use wear materials differ between the materials, and well, likely they will, and to be able to get some sort of catalogue for the different use wear patterns for the different materials. So 2 of the 4 tools that were used in each material were used until they were thoroughly spent, or between 100 and 500 strokes to make sure that they've been worked thoroughly, or until the material was thoroughly worked. 1 of them was retouched to see if any use wear remains after the tool has been retouched or sharpened, and then 1 was left untouched to show the use wear in its full glory. Alright, the other 2 remaining tools, 1 was used more in a pushing action, whereas all the others were used in a sort of pulling, scraping action, either away from you or towards you. And then the last one, the 4th one, was used as a handheld tool that wasn't hafted to a handle, to see if there is any differences with that. Scrapers were used as control to determine what edges would look like when the scraper is unused. The edges are unpolished with no rounding present, and rounded flake scars are present with smaller removals overlapping previous larger removals. A few step fractures are present but are randomly placed. So image A shows what a scraper edge looks like when pressure flaked with a bone point, and B shows what it's looked like when it's knapped with a stone. Image C shows the artifacts from Little Muck's shelter that's showing no use on those edges. Scrapers used on bone exhibit heavy damage to their edges presented as squarish flakes with multiple overlapping step fractures and crushing on the edge. Rounding and polish only appear once the edges has receded. For wood, use wear from scraping wood shows as the occasional large semicircular flake with multiple smaller semicircular flakes overlapping each other, often resulting in a serrated appearance on the edges that's made contact with the material. Image D shows the formation of these scars before they break off, showing how it creates that serrated appearance. Useware from scraping ochre presents itself as an extensive rounding of the edge, but instead of polish, the surface is very coarse and sometimes has small parallel striations present. This is due to rock-on-rock contact where the different grains erode one another away. Shell, on the other hand, presents a very extensively polished surface, and it tends to flatten the surface where the contact is made with the shell. Scrapers used on hide exhibit extensive rounding and smoothing of the edge, with some polish present. Polish is also visible on the ventral side with a slight flattening. For plant material, macro useware doesn't really show up and is barely visible to the naked eye and would need a higher resolution to see properly. Scrapers at Little Muck were used working bone, wood, shell, and hide in varying degrees and throughout time. There is a predominant use on hard materials throughout the site's history, with some use on shell and hide in the earlier occupations. Wood and hide were more often scraped prior to contact of foragers with farming communities, but a behavioral change is seen after the contact, where scrapers were used more frequently on bone. It is not certain exactly what the bone pieces were shaped into and why, but preliminary analysis of work bone at the site indicate that bone points and link shafts were made. This could be for either direct trade with the farmers, or more likely the site was used for manufacturing hunting implements, and the hunted animal products were then used to trade with the farmers for goods that the foragers needed. This indicated that foragers were not just passively standing by watching change in the area, but were actively involved in the local economy.